Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share black-eyed kids' horror stories. First story. I'm babysitting black-eyed children. This is some crap. Okay, so I work primarily as a babysitter, but with what's been going on, I haven't been getting any business. That was until yesterday. I got an email requesting my services to watch some kids for the weekend. I replied that I'd love to, provided their kids are healthy. I also informed them, due to the circumstances, I'd need half my pay in advance. They agreed to it and said they'd drop them off at 8. I made sure to clean up before they arrived. I was getting through with vacuuming when I heard my doorbell ring. I turned off my vacuum and told them to come in. "Hey," I said, coming down the stairs. "Don't worry, your kids will be safe with me. I just need to know if there's anything important I should know about." My voice trailed off when I saw who was inside my house. Standing in my living room was a family of 4. A dad, daughter, mom, and son. All of them had deathly pale skin like they hadn't seen the sun in years. That wasn't what made my blood run cold, though. It was their pitch-black eyes. The instant I saw them, I got an overwhelming urge to run out of the house. The problem was they were right at the bottom of the stairs. I thought about running back up and jumping out a window, but I doubted a broken ankle would increase my chances of escape. Besides, they weren't technically doing anything to harm me. I figured my best course of action was to talk with them. "Can I help you?" I hesitantly asked. "I'm the client you spoke with earlier," the dad said. "Wait, what? You guys are? But you're aliens, demons, monsters." "We've heard it all," the mom said. "I'm Eliza. This is my husband, Norman, our daughter, Louise, and our son, Abraham. Anyway, now that we've gotten the formalities out of the way, we need you to watch our kids for 5 days while we take care of something." 5 days? But he said that it'd only be for the weekend. I said, pointing to Norman. "And it doesn't matter anyway. I want you all out of my home." I pointed to the door. "You aren't in any position to be making demands. If you don't want to comply, however, we can show you what happens to our prey," he said. "And what would that be exactly?" I replied, trying to call his bluff. Norman made a choking motion with his hand. Instantly, I felt like a vice was crushing my windpipe. Okay, fine," I choked out. "I'll watch them." "Good," he said, releasing me. I rubbed my throat. "I want the first half of my pay, though." Without words, the mom reached into her purse and pulled out a large stack of $100 bills. "If you do a good job, there's more where this came from," Eliza said. "But if we come back to see so much as a scratch on either of them, no hell that you can think of will compare to what we'll do to you." "Yeah, got it," I softly replied. "Good," Norman smiled. His straight white teeth looked out of place in him. "See you in 5 days," he said, and left with Eliza. Words can't describe how awkward the silence was as the kids and I looked at each other. "So, is there anything you guys need?" "No, thank you. We'll let you know if we do," Louise said. "Right. I'll be in the kitchen if you do." For the first few hours, nothing really happened. They just sat on the couch and watched TV. That all changed around midnight. I was on my laptop when I heard one of them come into the kitchen. It turned out to be Abraham. "Do you need anything?" He stared at me for a couple moments with his soulless black eyes. "We need you to take us somewhere," he told me. "But everything's closed. Not where we need to go. Don't worry. It won't take long." We went in my car, and I began driving us out of my neighborhood. "Where are we headed?" I asked. "Just keep going. We'll let you know when we're there," Lewis said. "The place we want to turn out to be the cemetery." I'm afraid to ask, "But why are we here?" I inquired. "Our parents gave us specific tasks to do while they were gone. The first one is here, right? And what exactly is it that you're supposed to do here?" "Follow us." "Can't I wait here?" "We need you to come. If you don't, we'll tell our parents you hurt us." "But fine." I got out of my car and quietly closed the doors. We walked into the graveyard, which was dimly lit by some lamps. Abraham and Louise looked around. "There," Abraham said, pointing to the tallest gravestone. "What do you need from here?" I asked once we had walked to it. Louise pointed to a shovel resting on a nearby stone. "Dig," she told me. "Are you crazy?" "I'm not digging up someone's grave," I said. Before either of them could reply, we heard someone yell at us. "What do you think you were doing?" A man called to me. It turned out to be the groundskeeper. He was too far away to make us out completely. "We're just passing through," I called back. "Then why are you holding my shovel, and why are you parked outside?" "I thought it looked cool and kind of spooky here, and the car's not mine." "Really? Then I guess you won't mind if I have it towed." "No, wait," I pleaded. "Aha, so you admit it," he smugly said. "Okay, you got me, but it isn't what you think." "Then what are you doing here?" "I need to dig up this grave." I realized saying that didn't help me look any better the moment the words left my mouth. "You are doing what?" the groundskeeper asked, raising his voice. "That's it. I'm calling the police." "No, wait," I said, but he was already taking out his phone. That was when Abraham and Louise began approaching him. At first, he told them that they shouldn't be at the graveyard. When they got closer, however, he stopped talking. A look of fear came over him, and he tried running away. The children began levitating off the ground like ghosts. They flew towards the groundskeeper and caught him with ease. Despite him being larger than them, they were able to hold him down with ease. I rushed over to them to try stopping them, but I was too late. When I reached them, I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. My mind registered it. After a couple seconds, though, some sort of black, inky substance was shooting out of the kids' mouths. It covered the groundskeeper, making him look like a shadow with a solid presence. I could hear him screaming as he was being suffocated by it, although it was muffled. When he finally fell still, ending his torment, the kids took the stuff off of him. They did it by breathing it back into themselves. You know how the tape's victims look after Samara kills them in the ring? The groundskeeper's face looked similar to that, the only difference being the fear that was plain in his eyes. I handled it like most people would by freaking out. "What in the name of all that is sacred did you do to him?" I cried out. "We stopped him from interfering by exposing him to our essence," Abraham said. "I don't know what that means, but now we have a corpse to deal with." I was on the verge of tears. "Then it's convenient that we are in a cemetery," Louise said. "Now I suggest you continue with what we came here to do if you don't want to meet the same fate as him." I reluctantly dragged the groundskeeper's body to the tombstone, then began digging. "Happy place. I'm in my happy place," I sobbed as I did so. I opened the coffin to reveal the skeleton of a man who had been buried with some golden items. This included a gold-handled dagger, a gold-framed hand mirror, and a golden pocket watch. "Grab him and his things," Abraham said. "Oh, come on. You want me to steal a corpse?" "We do," Louise said. I sighed and picked it up. After I got it out, I threw the groundskeeper's body in the coffin, then put the lid over it. As I was closing it, I glanced at the inside of the lid. Disturbingly, there were some scratches on the inside of it and what I figured was dried blood. I drove us back. Nobody said a word the entire time. I try not to think about the fact that I had just witnessed a man get murdered and that there was a long-dead corpse in my trunk. When we got back, the kids went down into my basement with the corpse and the things we took from it. They haven't come up in a few hours. I've managed to type this up in the meantime. I've dealt with poorly behaved kids in my time, but Abraham and Louise are a bit much for me, and I have to deal with them for another 4 days, so... Does anyone know any tips that might help me? Second story. My job is to watch people die. If you met me on the street and asked me what my job was, I would tell you that I work from home consulting for an industrial laundry company. That is, after all, the cover story I have been provided with. The reality? My job is even simpler. Every Friday night, I dress up nice, report to a certain theater downtown, have a seat, and watch a performance. That's it. All it takes is a couple hours out of my week, and I end up making 6 figures a year with every benefit you could possibly ask for. I know. It sounds too good to be true. Pretty much anybody on the planet would kill to have a job like mine. At least, perhaps, until they find out just what kind of performances I'm made to attend. Before I start, though, I need you to keep in mind that I'm a good person. I donate thousands to the Rainforest Fund out of every paycheck, and me and my kids volunteer at the food bank weekly. I'm a devout believer, and I'm going to heaven when I die. After all, I, myself, have never hurt anybody, never raised a hand to injure any living soul. How could you possibly call me a sinner when all I ever do is watch? It started about 3 years ago when their job offer found me when I was at my most desperate. All I was told was every Friday night I would attend a performance at my city's fanciest theater. That was it. I was baffled at first. What the hell do I know about theater or ballet or orchestras? Had they gotten me mixed up with some big shot critic? During our talk on the phone, however, they politely reassured me that no critical ability would be required. All we ask, they said, is for you to be there to bear witness. Everything about it screamed scam, but I figured, what the hell? Worst case scenario, I listened to a pitch for some MLM or timeshare, politely decline, and then walk out with some pocket money. I was baffled when I pulled up to the theater. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of people were streaming in, all in nice suits and gorgeous gowns. I'd thrown on the fanciest clothes I could afford, yet I still felt severely underdressed. The theater was totally rented out by my employer, and only my fellow co-workers were allowed in. How much could it have cost to hire such a massive crowd just to attend this one performance? Who could possibly bankroll something like this? I tried to empty my mind and simply merge into that human tidal wave flowing through the doors. Every staff member was dressed in a refined all-black suit with black tie and undershirt, to the point they seemed to darken the air around them. Each wore a white comedy mask. The neoprene stretched into a grin of perpetual laughter, which struck me as almost mocking. They demanded that we hand over all electronic devices, even patting us down and running a metal detector over us. Then they reminded all attending not to leave their seats under any circumstances during the performance, recommending we take bathroom breaks before the show started, and to remain quiet and to keep our eyes open. They kept repeating the same mantra. No distractions, no diversions, no lapses in concentration. Remember, you are here to bear witness. If I'd been alone, I would have left right then and there. There was a tickling in the back of my brain, some primate part of me screaming that there was something terribly wrong here. But mob mentality is a hell of a thing. Everybody else seemed calm, nonplussed, handed their phones over without a fuss. There were a few holdouts, probably other newbies like me, but eventually they too relented. If everyone else is going along with it, I figured, why shouldn't I? Who wants to be the one single paranoid bastard who missed out on an easy paycheck? Stepping into a gorgeous theater like something out of 3 centuries ago, I was most struck by the make of the stage. It looked like the back action of a piano, strange levers and mahogany hammers looking like fingers manipulating countless lines of piano wire, some over a dozen feet long. All the taut wires stretched in bizarre formations across the stage reminded me, somehow, of a spider's web. I could not fathom a machine so complex, yet with such little apparent purpose. The nature of the performance always varies. Sometimes it's a work of Shakespeare, a ballet, an opera, hell, even a puppet show. That day, it was a concert featuring a small chamber orchestra of around 35 students. It looked like young and inexperienced, with a nervous air about them, as if this was their first time performing before such a crowd. Mostly a string section, plus one of each woodwind, and just a couple each on horns and percussion. The conductor was one of the staff members in the comedy masks. I was baffled. Who would put forward this much cash just for a small, green orchestra to play in such a massive, prestigious venue? One of them must be a billionaire's kid, I figured. It was the only explanation. This, I've since realized, is always the best part. The beginning of the performance, when you can, if you try, lose yourself in the display and pretend everything is okay, that it's all normal. It was best on those lucky days when the performers on stage were completely unaware of just what sort of danger they were in. That always makes it easier for everybody. On that first day, I was as oblivious as they were, and simply enjoyed the music. Maybe some snob of the orchestral arts would hear their amateurish mistakes, but to my untrained ear, they sounded just fine. Pleasant, even. But one question began to worm its way into my head, a small nagging at first, which crescendoed into a hammering on the inside of my skull. How much time has passed? At a certain point, I suspected the intermission was long overdue. But there were no windows, and I had to part with my electronic wristwatch at the door, so really, getting any sense of time was impossible. I dismissed it as my lousy attention span at first, but eventually others began taking notice. No one dared speak, but among the fellow newbies, I noticed furrowed brows and sideways glances, confused and concerned. The performers seemed to be getting restless as well, whispering and gesturing to each other and the conductor, who never ceased those robotic, sweeping motions of his gloved hands. It must have been 2 hours by then, if I had to guess, and they were starting to look exhausted, dehydrated. Some even looked as if they were about to quit playing. Continue performing. In a moment, all of the piano wire loudly reverberated and stretched taut with the movements of those mechanical contraptions on stage, as the whole thing bristled and tensed as though it were a living thing. And that voice, cracking like thunder, seemed to emerge from the stage itself with a mechanical roar like the grinding of metal on metal. That seemed to frighten them into submission for a while. It wasn't until a half hour later that my life changed irreparably. They'd been playing a quiet sonata, so everybody could hear the sudden FRRR ting, accompanied by a pained yelp. My eyes leapt to one of the violinists. One of her strings had broken and happened to snap her right in the eye. It could see the streak of scarlet bifurcate her pupil before the emerging blood replaced the entire eye with a thick redness. She stood, clutching a hand over her eye and blindly grasping with the other, gesturing toward medical help. And as she did so, that strange lattice of levers and hammers and pulleys all roared and clacked to life, like a bear trap being sprung. The machine's efficacy was just as sudden, just as brutal. Those clockwork edifices moved like a pair of robotic arms, aiming a wire for her neck as if trying to garrote her. But they moved at such a speed that the wires seemed to pass through her, like she wasn't even there. For a moment, she seemed fine, unaffected, as if nothing had happened at all. And then, things began to fall off of her. Her head, severed at the neck, alongside the hand she'd been holding over her eye, and the very fingertips of her other hand with which she'd been grasping a little too high. All had been cut cleanly, with surgical precision. Time seemed to slow as they all went clattering wetly to the floor, and the girl's body soon followed, as if it took a few moments for gravity to set in. Or, perhaps, for her body to realize she was dead. It happened so fast, it was hard to be properly horrified. It was more like, oh, maybe. Everybody stared at the chunks of meat that had once been a promising young woman with hopes and dreams. That spider web of wires was still rumbling and shaking all around them, and the mechanical voice roared once more. Continue performing. They were given no further warnings. A few of them jumped from their seats out of sheer instinct, not even thinking. None of them made it more than a step before the wires divided them in twain. The rest just kept playing exactly as they had been, as if their brain froze up at what they'd witnessed and simply ran on autopilot until their faculties slowly returned to them, and they realized that this instinct had saved their lives. Where once beauty filled the room, now the orchestra had been reduced to a discordant sound like a long, shuddering whine, like a mocking parody of music. They gripped their instruments with trembling, sweaty hands, playing just well enough to avoid stoking the ire of those quivering wires stretched taut all around them. They realized, gradually, that they were allowed to speak. Immediately, they began wailing hard enough almost to mercifully drown out that dismal cacophony that was once music, some begging and pleading with the staff, others screaming out threats, be they legal or physical. Nothing they said could shake the masked men and women in the slightest. They stood at order like statues, unflinching. Realizing this, they turned their attention to us. A wall of red, weepy eyes scanning the crowd for any hint of mercy, begging us to band together against the staff, calling us all sick bastard for just sitting there and watching them die. A blonde woman on violin had the most genius and cruel strategy of all. She merely began telling us about herself. Everything she could think of poured out in between sniffles and tears. My name is Vera H. Hayes. That's my husband, over there. She gestured to a dark-haired man on drums. He'd been the quietest of them all, seeming to be saving his strength. We have a little girl. She's 8 years old, and she loves her mama and papa. Her name is Lucy. She loves horses, and I was saving us to maybe give her riding lessons one day. I desperately want to cover my ears, but knew it would be against the rules. Why can't she just shut the hell up? I thought bitterly, grinding my teeth. I truly hated her. Hated her more than I'd ever hated before. But why? Some dim remnant of my reason asked. She's a victim here. She's done you no wrong. But I realized I hated her because she kept reminding me she was human. Reminded me of what I was doing to her. What we all were doing to her. Sitting here in complicity. And almost worked too. I almost resolved to save her. But then came the boom of a gunshot from far behind me. The shot had come from one of the tragedians standing amid the upper gallery. I was certain. I almost made the mistake of looking back. Instead, I kept my eyes locked forward and merely imagined who it was that just had their brains splattered across their seat. Had they stuck a phone in and tried calling 911? Had they tried making a break for it? Or maybe they just couldn't take it anymore and made the fatal decision to look away from the horror. I tried to distract myself by studying the impossible mechanism animating the blood-soaked piano wire. I couldn't figure it out. It was an impossible machine, existing in defiance all basic laws of geometry, and seemed to have no means of controlling it, instead operating automatically with some malign intelligence. Perhaps it was an extension of whatever creature composed the stage itself. It was a living thing, of that much I was certain. It breathed beneath the performers, and their blood soaked into its floorboards in moments, as if consumed. After some hours, the orchestra had gone quiet, having screamed themselves hoarse. I couldn't imagine being in their shoes. Even just watching them perform was a test of endurance. Many of them were oozing blood all over their instruments, from scarlet cuts where the skin had split. The woman on the French horn was struggling hardest of all, her lungs and hands burning with exhaustion. I can't, she eventually cried out in a hoarse little wheeze, horns slamming to the floor as her body gave out. I'm so sorry, I can't do any. A wire passed through flesh in an instant, and suddenly she had no mouth to speak, no eyes to see, no mind to think with. All of it lay splattered upon the stage, which sated itself upon that spilled vitae. Another gunshot. I quivered in my seat, sweat beading on my forehead from the terror. Somebody in the audience had looked away, and I realized I had just been about to do the same thing, had the sudden sound not knocked me out of my stupor. Most of the performers went in similar ways over the next few hours, either making mistakes or their bodies giving out. As monstrous as it may sound, I was quietly praying for them to get it over with. They were dead the moment that they walked on stage. Why drag it out for all these hours, just for the inevitable to happen anyway? I recognize now that it's almost impossible to make that choice, to simply give in and accept death in defiance of all our natural instincts. But the auditorium now reeked from audience members voiding their bowels, and the damn woman next to me just wouldn't stop crying, wouldn't stop at all. Vera and her husband lasted the longest of all, perhaps because they had each other. Over a dozen hours had passed, maybe even 2, and they were still playing a little duet in perfect sync despite everything. By now, they were simply talking to each other as if nothing was wrong, as if we weren't even watched. Baby, when we get out of here, I'm going to take you to Martha's Vineyard. I know I've been saying that for so long, but God, I wasted so much money on that stupid motorcycle, he said. Lucy's going to love it. Vera chuckled. I don't know. It might be boring for a little girl. Isn't it all a bunch of old people up there? He laughed weakly. Oh, maybe in town, but you know her. Once you get her in the water, You can't get her back out. She's a natural-born swimmer, I swear. Think we'll see her in the Olympics someday? Ha! It was surreal to watch, like I was peeking in on a private conversation a couple was having in their own home. But I could tell both of them were trying to maintain some illusion of normalcy, anything to keep themselves psychologically intact as the hours pass. Even as they tried to smile and laugh, there was a quiver in their tone, a desperation, a fear of what might happen if there was a single break in the conversation. A lot of what they said was too personal to relay here. They went into old regrets, past mistakes, resolved every argument they ever had in all their years together. It was like they wanted to make sure they said everything they had to say before the end came. I think I owe them, at least, their privacy. But the husband was slowly deteriorating. He'd moved too quick, caught the cymbal with his hand, leaving a wide gash along his palm that was gushing blood at a terrifying rate. Now he was getting woozier and woozier, swaying dizzily, his eyes unfocusing, his speech becoming slurred and his playing sloppy. Vera desperately tried to keep him focused. Talk to me, baby. Think of the beach. Lucy's going to love the seashells. She'll pick her favorite and put it on that little stand in her room with all her little trophies. She rambled on, but by the end, all he could manage was half-hearted grunts of affirmation. He was leaning in his seat, and then his drumstick went flying right out of his hand, sending a cloud of pink mist through the air along its path. And yet he kept going through the motions of playing, as if he didn't even notice. Then a sudden clarity formed in his eyes, and he stared at his empty hand in disbelief. And then the piano wire was tensing and strumming all around him. And then in an instant he was up from his seat and racing towards us. He knew it was over. He just wanted to strike out of the world if he could, one last act of defiance. He even locked eyes with me, and I'll never forget the look on his face. Why are you watching this? You sick bastards. You sick, twisted. He threw his remaining drumstick, and the trajectory would have delivered it right to me. But the piano wires lacerated it in midair, slicing into it from 100 different directions until it disappeared into a cloud of sawdust. And then they did the same to him. Vera didn't scream or sob. She just tensed and let out the tiniest little gasp, like when you're at the doctor's and know the shot is inevitable, but it still stings anyway. And then she was all alone. She looked at us like she wanted to speak, wanted to say something, to express what was happening inside her. But what was there left to say? She'd spent almost a full day screaming herself hoarse with every combination of words she could think of. None of it helped. None of it meant anything. Instead, she expressed herself through music. She began to play the most mournful, sobering solo I had ever heard, one I knew she making up as she went along, one with which she communicated those parts of herself that words could not encompass. She stared us all down, eyes red and bloodshot, making eye contact individually as if to remind us that we were not a shapeless mass, that we were all individually responsible. I only barely remember the sound of it now, as if I'd heard it in a dream, and yet even now the memory tears at my heart. She performed for what felt like an eternity. And then, in the end, she slowly, calmly set down her violin, stood up, and took a bow. And then she was unmade. Everyone stood up around me all of a sudden, and I was immediately caught up in it too, performing a standing ovation that dragged on and on. We screamed, shouted, cried, threw things, smashed our fists against seats, tore our hair, laughed, and danced with each other. It was the ultimate catharsis after all that silence, after a full day of holding all in. Never before had I felt so connected to a crowd of people on some deep, spiritual level. We marched out of the theater, stumbling like a procession of ghouls with blank faces and tired eyes. The staff were as polite as ever, thanking us for attending the performance and hoping that we enjoyed the show. Some were dragging the bodies of shot audience members out of the theater. As I finally emerged into the outside world, I was stunned to find it was still the same night I had entered. At least 20 hours had passed inside that theater. I was sure of it, but for the outside world, only 2 hours had passed. Exactly the duration listed on their job offer. I'd never been explicitly told not to reveal what I'd seen there, and now I knew why. Nobody believed me. Or worse, maybe they were covering it up. I swear to God, the police dispatcher laughed at me over the phone. I swore I'd never go back. I'd been part of something evil, something unfathomable, and it would haunt me forever. But the next year was one of constant desperation, debt climbing as job opportunities declined at equal rates. I held out for about a year, but eventually I gave in, and to my horror, the next performance was easier now that I knew what to expect. And then the next was easier still, and the next. The performance is always different, but the end result is always the same. I have to remind myself that I'm not culpable for what they're doing there. All I do is watch. We watch people die every day in the news and online, people suffering horrible fates, often in places our own countries help to destabilize. How are my actions any different, really? We all have to accept that terrible things happen in this world, and all we can do about them is either look away or look the horror right in the eye. Is choosing to look away more moral, or is it only more cowardly? And besides, wouldn't it be worse for them if there wasn't an audience? If they had to die there in the dark alone? No one seeing, no one caring, no one remembering. After all, someone has to bear witness. Third story. A child is knocking on my door every midnight. It started a few weeks ago, and it drives me insane. I rented this house, which was cheap and nice looking. I lived here for 2 months before it started happening. One night, I was dreaming and heard a sound in my dream, like someone knocking on a door. I slowly woke up and opened my eyes. What surprised me was that the sound hadn't stopped. I realized it wasn't a dream. I checked my phone. It was midnight. The neighbors were usually asleep then, but I still thought they were partying or something, which caused this sound. It was strangely coming from my door, however. Is someone knocking on my door? I asked myself. I quickly jumped out of my bed, thinking that someone might need help, and rushed to my front door. I was late. The knocking had already stopped when I got there. I opened the door and looked around, but everything was empty, including the garden and the streets. It was a strange experience, and I wish that was the worst thing that happened. I went back to bed and quickly fell asleep. The following day, I'd already forgotten what had happened that night and went to work. Then the same thing happened that night, too. I woke up again, hearing a continuous knocking on my door. I checked my phone. It was exactly midnight again. It must be some kind of joke, I thought. I walked to the door, unlocked it, then opened it. Again, nobody was there. Hey, idiot, I shouted. Don't dare to wake me up again, or you'll regret it. Asshole. It happened 3 more times at the exact same time. I spoke about it with one of my coworkers, and he recommended me to buy a security camera so I can report whoever did that to the police. I agreed and bought a camera as soon as I finished my shift. Installing it above my door was a way harder job than I care to admit, but after a few hours of cursing, it was working. I went to sleep with a smile on my face, knowing that whoever thought this was funny will get recorded on the camera. I haven't even slept. Instead, I stayed up until midnight watching some series on TV. Of course, at exactly midnight, I heard the knocking. I stayed on my couch, watching the TV. After a few minutes, the knocking still hadn't stopped. I started to get annoyed, so I stood up and walked to my door, and that was the moment when it finally stopped. Funny guy, I thought. He waited for me to get to the door, and then he stopped. I opened the door. Nobody was there, as expected. After that, I checked the security camera's recording because I still hadn't connected it to my laptop, so I couldn't see it live. I should have waited until morning. At 23:59, to my surprise, a child ran to my door. I didn't believe it. For all this time, I was pranked by a child. He was around 7. When the clock hit midnight, he started banging on my door, but I didn't see any watch or phone with him, so I had no idea how he knew the time. As he was knocking on the door, he looked straight into the camera. Maybe it was just the strange lighting, but his eyes seemed totally black. I freaked out. I fast-forwarded the recording to that point when I came out. When the kid might have heard that I was coming, he jumped down from the stairs and crouched down behind it. Then I saw myself opening the door. I was terrified. The whole time I was looking for someone and shouting like some kind of idiot. That kid was hiding behind the stairs, just beneath my feet. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't go back to sleep. I kept thinking about that kid. What if he's still hiding there? When morning finally arrived, I hurried to work. When I got out of my house, I carefully checked the place alongside my stairs. It wasn't that tall, it only had 4 steps, but it was enough for the kid to hide behind it. I showed a video to my coworkers, and they were freaked out too. I asked them for advice. One of them told me to ask the neighbors if they saw the kid, or if he was knocking on their door too. That day, I talked to 5 people from the neighborhood, showing the video to them. They told me they had never experienced something like this and had never seen this kid. No one recognized him. I had no idea what to do at that point. I decided that maybe I should talk to the kid. I was afraid of meeting him, I don't know why. After all, he was just a child. Then I remembered I could talk with him through the security camera because it has a speaker. So I had a plan for the night. I set everything up, and I watched the camera display on my laptop when the time arrived. It was 23:59. I needed less than 1 minute, and the kid would appear in front of my door. Finally, I could see the kid walking up my stairs, and as soon as the clock hit midnight, he started to knock. I turned on the speaker. "Hey mate, can I help you? You are really consistent with your knocking. Do you need help or anything? Where are your parents?" "Where's mommy?" The kid responded from outside, through the camera's microphone. "She used to be here. Where's she?" "We live here. That's our house." I was shocked by this response. It was totally unexpected. "Your mommy's not here, little one. I live here for a few months now. Do you want me to call the police? Maybe they'll help to find your mommy." "Where's mommy?" "Where's she?" The kid cried, but it sounded unnatural. It was like someone imitating a kid crying. Meanwhile, the kid looked up to the camera, stretching his neck, which was abnormally long, maybe about 10 centimeters longer than usual. I felt uncanny. "Listen, I have no idea." I tried to speak to him, but he interrupted me, still crying. "You killed her. You killed her, you prick," he shouted, with the focus being on the word prick. He then ran away. So, since I'm anonymous here, I can swear to God that I haven't killed anyone, and I would never do such a thing. I had no idea what was he talking about. I think it's unnecessary to say, but yeah, it was another night without a single minute of sleep for me. The following day, I went to a birthday party for one of my friends. I got home late at night, and I was a little bit drunk. Actually, I was totally drunk, so I decided to go to sleep. I didn't want to communicate with that kid that night, and I hoped that he left forever, and I would never see him again. When I woke up the following morning, I realized that I didn't wake up at midnight because of the knocking. Maybe the kid really left? The blood froze in me as I walked to my front door. It was wide open. I started to remember the previous night, and I was sure that I closed the door. But I didn't lock it. I was swearing loudly at the realization, and immediately watched back the security cameras recording. At exactly midnight, the child walked to my door, but he didn't knock. He just opened it and walked in. I fast-forwarded the entire night on the camera, and he never left the house. I searched the whole building and found nothing. I even called the police, showing them the security recordings. They also found it strange, but they didn't manage to find the kid. Since then, every midnight, I hear whispers in the dark. "Where's mommy? You killed her. I will move out next week, but I'm terrified." Fourth story, black-eyed children. I was walking my car as quickly as I could. I checked my watch. It was 7:15 p.m. I shook my head. My phone rang. The screen showed that it was my wife calling, right on time. "You better be close to the restaurant," she said. The tone in her voice left me wondering if she knew that I was just leaving the office. I stayed silent. "Damn it, Jack." She cursed quietly. "I'm already here. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much work I would have to get done today. And we're still not on pace to make our deadline. The whole team is working late. Not just me. And I can't be the only person leaving on time when my subordinates are staying late." I pleaded. "How long until you get here?" She asked angrily. "If I run every red light, I can be there in 30 minutes, I told her. She didn't answer for a long while. I got into my car, and just as I started to wonder if she had hung up on me, my car picked up the Bluetooth. Okay, just hurry. It's bad enough the waiter has asked me twice if I was waiting for someone. She instructed. I'm sorry, babe. I'll be there as soon as I can. I said. I shifted my car into reverse and started to back up. A loud bang on my window made me slam on the brakes. I threw it into the park and turned around to see if I hit something or worse, someone. I didn't see anything. I turned back around in my seat to find two children standing next to my door. I jumped at the shock. They both just stood there. Judging by their size, I would guess they were about 9 or 10. I had this terrible feeling in my stomach that there was something wrong. But they were children, probably lost. I told myself. I cracked the window just enough to ask if I could help them. Can I use your phone? One of the kids asked. The child's tone had a tinge of darkness to it. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. But I reached for my phone and unlocked it. When I looked back up at the child, I noticed they had both moved closer. They both stared down at their feet. Their hoods up over their head cast shadows over their faces. It almost appeared they didn't have any faces at all. At that point, I had this unyielding sense of fear building that I couldn't justify. Is there someone you'd like me to call for you? I asked. Then one of the kids raised his head slightly. The shadows that covered his face parted as the new angle of his hood allowed me to see his face. But his eyes were still hidden in the shadows. They appeared to be pitch black. Not that they were missing, but he had no iris, no whites in his eyes at all. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and the boy seemed to notice my fear. He lowered his head again. We need to use your phone, he pleaded. I recovered and scolded myself quietly for allowing a trick of the light to scare me so badly. Who can I call for you? Just give me their number, I said, my hand ready to dial. Maybe it was the fact that the kids wouldn't look at me. Perhaps it was the fact that the kids were out of place in the business district after sundown. But something inside me was screaming not to give them my phone. If you can't give me the number, I'm sure you can go inside the lobby and ask the security guard to let you call your parents, I said, and pointed toward the lobby door. Neither one of them turned to look. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I put my car in reverse. I was eager to get the hell out of there. I was eager to get away from these children. I looked in the rearview mirror to make sure I was clear. A loud bang stopped me in my tracks. For a split second, I thought I hit someone, and then I heard it again. Both of the boys were slapping their hands, palm down, on my driver's side window. A third time, a fourth time. In unison, they slapped my window. Can we just get in your car? We need a ride. They asked in a monotone and utterly unsettling tone. I slammed the gas down and backed up without even looking, and then I slammed into drive and peeled out. I was a good 10 minutes down the road before my heart stopped trying to beat out of my chest. I was so worked up that I almost missed my exit. I wanted to get home so bad, I had forgotten about date night. I met my wife at her favorite restaurant, and we ate. She was initially angry about me being late. We hadn't had much time alone since we had our son. He was 4 now, and this was probably our 5th date night in that 4 years. Her mood switched from being angry to laughing at me as I explained why I was so late. I told her everything about the kids. So, you were scared of a couple of kids? They could still be out there, looking for their parents. She heckled me. She knew how scared I was. There was something wrong with them, but she didn't believe it. At least not at that point. Our son was staying at the babysitter's house all night, so we had the house to ourselves. It was 3 in the morning when we heard the knock at the door. I woke up first and just sat in bed and listened. There was a faint, steady knock at the door. In threes. Knock, knock, knock. And then a pause followed by another set of 3. Knock, knock, knock. Then my wife woke up. Do you hear that? She asked. Yeah, there's someone at the front door. I replied. My heart sped up. I knew before I did that it was them. My wife sat up and grabbed her phone. It's after 3 in the morning. Who could it be? She asked. And they didn't hit the doorbell. She added. She opened the doorbell app on her phone to reveal an empty porch. There was nobody there. She showed me. The knocking continued, and then I saw them. There was a faint silhouette in the darkness. "Zoom in there," I said and pointed to the corner of the steps. She did, and we could see them. The two boys were standing in the shadows. One of them kicked the steps. "Knock, knock, knock." My wife looked at me. "There's no way those kids followed you home. This has to be a joke," she said. She stood up and put on her robe. I did too. We both made our way downstairs. We argued as we walked. She wanted to open the door. I didn't. "Knock, knock, knock." "We can't open the door," I told her. "They're just kids playing a prank." She replied, "Knock, knock, knock." Finally, we reached the door and my wife undid the locks and swung it open. We both took a step back as soon as we did. The kids were no longer standing in the shadow, but had moved up to the first step. The only light was from behind us, flowing out of the house. It was enough for us to see the two small figures staring at us, but not enough to see any detail. "What do you want?" my wife asked. I was flipping the light switch on and off for the porch light. It wouldn't come on, but I knew it had been on when we got home. "Can we come inside?" the kids asked in unison. I could see that my wife had gone pale. She finally believed me. Something wasn't right. The kids both took a step to the next step. "Can we call the police for you? Are you lost?" she asked them. They stepped up to the porch, and then they were close enough. Just 3 feet away, their faces were fully illuminated. The light revealed the same thing I thought I had seen earlier. Wide eyes, black as coal. They began to smile at us. "We need to come inside. We need help," they said in unison as if they shared the same thoughts. I moved my wife out of the way and slammed the door. My hands fumbled for the locks as I looked through the peephole. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled through the door. My wife still had her phone in her hand. She started to dial 911. "Wait," I said. "They're leaving," I told her. The kids walked back into the street and disappeared into the night. The next day we slept in and then picked up our son. It was a pretty uneventful day, at least until 3 a.m. I woke to the sound of knocking. I sat up, half asleep. I heard my wife tell me it was just our son. "I'll get it," she told me. I went back to sleep. That was about 10 minutes ago. I noticed she didn't come back to bed, and I decided to check the security cameras on my phone. My wife is lying on the floor dead. There is blood everywhere. Standing at her feet are the two boys, and next to them is my son. His eyes were black as coal. As I'm writing this, I can hear them walking down the hall toward me. For the love of God, if you see black-eyed children, do not talk to them. Do not give them anything, and please do not let them into your house. Fifth story. My wife has been peeking at me from around corners and behind furniture. It's gone from weird to terrifying. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea, and that's fine. But that's what was so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind a corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the shit out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird and just totally out of character for her, like I said, but I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of OJ in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning. Grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed, I'll admit it. Not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason at that moment I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards, out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her, or even yell after her. I just stood there frozen in shock, wondering what had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed. But she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. What was that about last night? I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. You were peeking at me again. From over there, I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. You creep me out sometimes, you know that? I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even. She teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sound her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth was she doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you. But joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house, and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What Lynn? I snapped. This shit is getting really annoying. I waited for her to apologize or to call me a jerk. But instead I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. Lynn, I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. I swear to God, just stop it, I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before, but there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom, so I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow, I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold. Maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I'd had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill, so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams. All of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now." She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs. As if Lynn could hear them from her place outside, her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife, Rebecca, hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her. That no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her. Give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home." And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was, not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled. Like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation. But if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry, because it's not my place. But is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know. She's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife. But how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. No, she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else? I asked. No. She looked awful, though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I swore an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly, she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believe she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting. But this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong. Dangerous, even. Like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband, I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed. So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable. like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. Yes. She answered, already sounding irritated. Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk? I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I could spare a moment. What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin? She said coolly. It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something. I was quickly interrupted. It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is it you want from me? She asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. I want to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues. I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind, Dash, she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother you would be as well. I said, my frustration evident in my voice. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me. She snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason, I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. Please. If not for me, do it for Lynn. I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. Marianne? What's WR dash? I started. Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye. I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no, I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else. Someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet, but I told them about our last encounter. How she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just want to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for you two, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning, just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets like he was going on a stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. What do you guys use to clean the floors around here, shit? Chris mumbled. Shut up. I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. Why are you looking under the couch? Chris asked eventually. Aren't we looking for your wife? He was looking at me like I was a moron. Let's just go upstairs, I whispered. He shook his head, but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken a photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something? Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction. But me, your wife's in here collecting eyeballs. Chris said, gagging. Ben, I think we should go. He called from the hall. I'm getting nauseous. All right. I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue, and I couldn't help but gag. Who the lines up eyeballs in their closet like that? Chris mumbled. I tried to tell you she needed help. I said, she doesn't need help, Ben. She needs an exorcist. He said, you coming or what? I can't stand the smell any. His words died in his throat, and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. Christ, I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving to say the least. Wide eyes and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. Lynn, I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in 2 quick little movements as if she were nodding. Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that? I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. I love you, Lynn, I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide, open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding, I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb on my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. "Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm on my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run. Go," I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move, because a second later, I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said, "You, playing hide and seek?" I reached back and pushed him toward the steps. "Move your ass, Chris," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. And then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on a line with 911. I watched the rear-view mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us. But I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search, but of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I found you," and a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.